The year is 1998. Titanic was inspiring DC's CGI department with some beautiful shots of the boat, but more importantly, F1 was in the middle of a brilliant season in which we had a tale as old as time of Ferrari versus McLaren. But in this brilliant season, we had one race that stood above them all. Chaos, rage, underdogs, the whole lot. This is the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix. So a few things that you need to know before we get right into this Grand Prix. First up, points wise, in this era of F1, you had drivers scoring points from first all the way down to sixth. First place getting 10, sixth place getting 1, but surprisingly second place was a massive drop from first place 10 points down to second place 6 points. So it really did matter basically who got the most wins in a season. And there was also no fastest lap. But for this season, the main storylines were all about, well, like I said, McLarens and the Ferraris, but their two drivers of Schumacher and Mika Hakkinen. And my god, was it a close battle up until this point. Spa was the fourth last race of the season, and up to this race coming into it, Hakkinen led the championship by 7 points on 77 to Schumacher on 70. And to really emphasise how important this championship was to both teams, McLaren hadn't won a Drivers' or Constructors' Championship since 1991, when Ayrton Senna dominated the season, and for Ferrari it had been even worse. They hadn't won anything since 1983. That wasn't even a Drivers' Championship year, that was just Constructors. So both teams, quite deservedly, were very much on edge around each other, and my god, with rain on the forecast, tensions were rising. So let's get straight into it. And straight away, like we would have expected in practice, it was McLaren and Ferrari trading blows with each other, with Schumacher topping the timings in FP1. However, it then went on to FP2 where McLaren absolutely wiped the floor with the rest of the grid, very much showing most likely that McLarens were the ones to beat around Spa. Which I'm going to get straight into with the qualifying. Is exactly what we saw. Now, I'm not going to go over first and second just yet, but here are the timings for third, fourth and fifth. So in third place, we had a massive showing from Damon Hill in the Jordan, qualifying for third place in the race with a time set of 1 minute 49.7. Then in fourth and fifth, you had Schumacher and Eddie Irvine with a 1 minute 50 and a 1 minute 50.2. Those were all pretty decent. However, in second place, you had David Coulthard in the McLaren with a 1:48.8. Almost a whole second ahead of his closest rival of Damon Hill. And then Mika Hakkinen was even further ahead with a 1 minute 48.7. He actually was more than a second ahead than the rest of the field. Insane. So after qualifying, it very much was advantage McLaren coming into this race. So, could the Ferraris catch up? Well, let the race begin. 5 red lights and away we go. With Hakkinen having a decent start, which could not be said compared to his teammate David Coulthard, who completely dropped the ball, being swamped by the likes of both the Ferraris and Villeneuve round the outside into the first corner. And then looking elsewhere other than the McLarens, you had Damon Hill in third place, again a dreadful start. He was now down to 7th come to the first corner, and then this happened.
Coulthard in the wall. David Coulthard in the wall. Stop the race. They'll have to red flag this.
This has to be one of, if not the craziest crash I have ever seen in F1. Ever, and probably will ever see in F1. I can't see a crash ever being this big in the modern era. Just absolute scenes. David Coulthard trying to get on to the acceleration a little bit earlier to catch up to the front two. Completely just lost his car, banging into the wall. And surprisingly, it wasn't actually him who properly collected the rest of the field, but there was just so much spray and debris from his car and the weather that everyone was slowing down, bunching up together, and it just went into a colossal screw up with practically the entire grid being wrapped up in it. And no surprises here, they had to call out the red flag, and this red flag would last for about an hour. That's how long it took to get rid of all of the debris after the first corner. It was mayhem. But here's where it gets interesting, and here's something I didn't tell you before the Grand Prix, because I wanted to keep it a surprise for anyone who didn't know this. But back in the day in F1, you would normally have a spare car lying about for if one of your drivers did have a screw up on the first lap and something like this happened. So we had this situation where most of the grid needed to get into their spare car, so you just had all of the drivers basically running back to their garages to get ready to make sure that they could be running for the next restart. It was absolute scenes. So surprisingly, even though almost all of the grid crashed out after that first incident, most of them were able to restart their race on the restart in their original positions. So let's run it back one more time. Let the race begin. 5 red lights and away we go, and it was almost deja vu with Hakkinen having a decent enough start and David Coulthard, again, he must have been daydreaming. I don't know what was going on with him in that McLaren, but he got swamped absolutely instantly by the Jordan of Damon Hill and both Ferraris. This time round, Damon Hill got a brilliant start, taking first place of the Grand Prix for Jordan. Absolute scenes. And then Ferraris weren't far behind. But if it wasn't bad enough with David Coulthard not paying attention at the start of the Grand Prix, McLaren's decided the first time was so nice, I'm going to do it twice. And Mika Hakkinen spun after turn 1, crashing out with a Sauber of Patrese crashing into him. They couldn't even get that restart right. However, this time round, with it only being 2 cars, it wasn't nowhere near as damaging for the rest of the field. But for McLaren, who had looked so dominant for this whole weekend, Mika Hakkinen looked brilliant. The race hadn't even properly started and their championship fight was done for this weekend. They were going to score 0 points. But like I mentioned, for Hill, this couldn't have gone any better as he was now in first place with Irvine in second and Schumacher in third. However, Irvine wouldn't keep in that second place for long as Schumacher would then re-overtake his teammate going into turn 4. And then one disaster for McLaren to another disaster to McLaren to another one as David Coulthard was now in the gravel. They could not catch a break, meaning come to the end of lap 1, David Coulthard was able to keep his car going. However, the grid now looked like this. Damon Hill in first, Michael Schumacher in second, Eddie Irvine in third, Alesi in fourth with the Sauber, Villeneuve in fifth, and Frentzen in sixth, with obviously Hakkinen out and David Coulthard all the way back in 15th. No one could have predicted such a crazy start for the 98 Spa Grand Prix. And this would have such massive implications for the championship if it ended like this. If it ended with Schumacher in second and Hakkinen getting 0 points, it would mean going into the next race of the season, 3 races left, bear in mind, Hakkinen would only have a lead of 1 point on 77 to Schumacher's 76. Now, coming on to lap 7, and Schumacher had been putting on a lot of pressure to Damon Hill this entire time. But now was the time to strike, as a lot of people thought Schumacher would play it safe, stick behind Damon Hill until he had a very good chance, basically, to make sure he didn't crash out, but he was thinking otherwise. He dived it down the inside. What an overtake by Michael Schumacher for first place in the Grand Prix. Now, like I mentioned, the championship battle now all of a sudden looked like it was in Schumacher's favour, with him on 80 points to Mika Hakkinen on 77. But Ferrari's brilliant start could only last for a little while, as Schumacher fans were given a heart attack by Murray Walker's commentary.
For second and off goes Schumacher.
No, it's Irvine, it's Irvine.
Apologies.
But it was actually Eddie Irvine who had spun out and broke his front wing, which wasn't ideal when they were trying to claw back some points on McLaren, especially as after Irvine had to pit on the end of that lap, he would be down to 11th place. Oh, and also on lap 8, we saw a familiar name of Jos Verstappen DNFing from the race with some engine issues. And I wonder if he would have any children who were interested in Formula 1. But now, like a lot of races that have a lot of chaos and carnage at the start of a Grand Prix, it started to settle down after the Jos Verstappen DNF and Eddie Irvine spin until around the mid-lap 20s. But that doesn't mean the racing stopped, as Schumacher up front now had an enormous gap to Hill, looking like he was definitely going to win this race. Hill still in second place. However, elsewhere, not on the front two, Ralf Schumacher had a brilliant few laps, coming from 7th place now all the way into 3rd position, meaning Jordan now had 2nd and 3rd place, a double podium. Alesi was still in 4th, Frentzen was now up to 5th, and Irvine, after getting a bit unlucky, was now up to 6th and chasing down Frentzen. So it was not over for Ferrari. Irvine still looked like he had a lot more pace than a lot of the rest of the field. However, when it was all looking decent again for Ferrari with Schumacher in the lead, Irvine looking like he could potentially get back into those podium positions, it all crumbled apart in one of the worst laps for Ferrari in history. Lap 24. We'll start off with the big one. Michael Schumacher, coming up to a slow David Coulthard, still having a dreadful race, was getting lapped. But with the spray, it was almost impossible to see where the cars were on the track. And David Coulthard, thinking Schumacher would go round the outside while he slowed down, was not the case. Considering it was the racing line, it was a bit stupid from Coulthard. and Schumacher crashed into the back of him, losing his front right tyre. Now, I will say, going back to the pits, it's incredible how sturdy that Ferrari was with only 3 tyres. However, of course, they would have to retire the car. It was just absolutely in a state. But the retirement wasn't it for the drama, as Schumacher, quite rightfully, was absolutely fuming with David Coulthard. And he jumped out of that car so quickly, storming his way to the McLaren garage, and really wanted to start a fight with David Coulthard. Both of their teams basically had to form a wall to make sure that wouldn't happen. It was absolutely incredible. Like, I generally don't think you would see this sort of scene happen these days in F1. Like, it looked like Schumacher really just wanted to punch him in the face. And on one side of the Ferrari garage, which couldn't get worse, as now he was out of the race, meaning Häkkinen would definitely be 7 points ahead of him in the championship, it then went from terrible to absolutely dreadful, as Eddie Irvine, trying to get past Frentzen, applying pressure, spun out and he had to retire the car. Now, I would like to mention, David actually didn't retire from the race. He was able to get the car going again. He was again at the back of the grid. And the drama doesn't stop there, as with Schumacher out, Irvine chasing the pack out, Coulthard still at the back of the grid, it meant Hill was in first place with Schumacher in second, a Jordan 1-2, and then you had a Lacey in third place in the Sauber. What? If you had told anyone coming into the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix that it'd be a double Jordan 1-2 and a Sauber on the podium, they would have thought you were smoking crack. But even though there was so much drama at the front of the field, we then go back to further down, where an almost identical crash then happened with Fisichella and Nakano, shattering debris completely around the track, with Fisichella retiring from the race. And then this would send out the safety car at the end of lap 26, meaning that when the safety car was called out, there was now only 8 drivers left in the race. 6 of them could score points, so if you just finished a Belgian Grand Prix, you could score points for your team. Breathe. Holy crap, thank God there was a safety car to calm down this race. It was absolute chaos, and that's just underplaying it. But all of this drama, Ferrari's going off, McLaren's going off, all of the front teams just absolutely pooping the bed. It did not matter to Jordan, as after the safety car, all they had to do to get their first 1-2 Formula 1 history was to bring both the cars back. And bear in mind, Jordan were the only half-decent team basically left on the field, as Alesi in the Sauber, he wasn't catching them. And that is exactly what happened. Come the final lap with the checkered flag, Damon Hill, with his teammate only a second behind him, would cross the line in first place, Ralf Schumacher in second. And my God, did they deserve this fairy tale story. They had had such a poor start to the 98 season. They had brought some upgrades to the car and it started to work and their season was bouncing back. And to get a 1-2, it meant the world to Eddie Jordan, who led the team, who really just could not hold in his excitement. And I don't blame him. This probably was the best day of his life. But with all the Jordan craziness, don't forget about Alesi getting a whopping third place for Sauber. Bear in mind, they had an even worse season than Jordan, and it would be their only podium on 98, and my God. Basically, that whole podium was just good vibes. Everyone was just excited to be there. But that is all she wrote for the 98 Belgian Grand Prix. Häkkinen would then go on to win the 98 championship with 100 points to Schumacher's 86. So, could it have been different without that crash between Coulthard and Schumacher? It would have been a lot closer of a gap, and Häkkinen potentially could have made a mistake. McLaren would also take the Constructors' title, being the perfect season for them. However, for Ferrari fans, they would not have to wait long for some revenge, as the noughties were right round the corner, and we all know exactly how that started. So, the moral of the story, imagine they had F1 Fantasy in the 98 season. I think we could have seen most of the teams with everyone on their team getting negative points. And considering how bad Australia was, just imagine how bad this would have been. Take care everyone, and I'll see you all very soon.